Sometimes I feel like I want to fly without no wings. I elevate.
Hello, everybody. My name is Matt Barkoff. I am the Sober Cold Bear, and welcome to another episode of the Sober Cold Bear podcast. And joining me today, I'm so grateful and excited to have Alexis Pleus here joining the podcast from TruthPharm. Alexis, we're going to get to you in a moment, but I just want to first say thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all that you do with your organization, which everybody you're going to learn about in a second. And, you know, obviously we're going to get into your story and kind of talk about how it all came to be. Before we do that, I am going to go through my standard spiel. I am in a 12-step recovery program. I go to AA, I have a sponsor, and I've worked the steps, and I go to a lot of meetings. That for me is a program that works. This is not a place to be, if you are looking to get sober. This is a resource to you. This is a place for great content and great conversations like we're going to have today with Alexis. But if you do need to get sober, first thing to say is I need help, which is like obviously sometimes pretty hard sometimes. But once you do that, there's a lot of resources out there for you. You can go to rehab. You can go to meetings. I always kid. I should have probably gone to rehab. I do go to meetings. But, you know, again, this is just a resource. It's a place to learn about really great individuals and organizations like Alexis and TruthPharm and others. And if you need help, just ask for help. And there's a lot of folks. Reach out to me, reach out to Alexis, reach out to your best friend, your loved one, what have you. But we're all here to help you, and we want to see you succeed and be well. So without further ado, Alexis, thank you again for being here. You are the executive director of TruthPharm, which is an organization in Washington, D.C. And, you know, would love to hear kind of your story. We were connected through our good friend, Mr. Jason Mayo, who has spoken at your organization, I believe. And I'm just so grateful to have you here. So thank you for being here. And we can hop into a conversation and go from here.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation. Jason's just such an amazing guy. First thing, our organization, TruthPharm, is actually in upstate New York. Yeah, we're in Broome County, Binghamton, New York, which most people will not know where that is because it's a very small city. But we're in upstate New York, and that upstate just simply means we're not in New York City. So
I think my mistake was Jason had said he was in DC, and I assumed because of everything that you guys do in DC, and that's completely my bad. I'm not perfect. Make mistakes.
Yeah. No worries. I just figured for your listeners, it might be important for them to know the difference. So TruthPharm is a harm reduction based organization. Our mission is to focus on raising awareness, reducing stigma, educating the public, and advocating for policy change, because we really want to get at the root issues here rather than dealing with picking up all the broken pieces all the time. We want to get at the root issues of the problem with the overdose epidemic. But we're also a direct service provider, which we ended up becoming just because there was so much need in our community and so many people are left behind by the systems that exist. And so we're a drop-in center in our county. People come in and they access harm reduction services, they access treatment, they access medical providers. We help them meet their social determinants of health needs, so housing, food, clothing, things like that. The majority of the people that we serve are actually unhoused, and we see 35 to 50 people 4 days a week. So we're really busy as a direct service provider. So that's TruthPharm in our hometown. But as advocates and educators and activists, we do a whole different, realm of work locally at the state level and the national level. And we created this national event, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, called the Trail of Truth. And we host the Trail of Truth National, which is a national memorial for all substance use related deaths in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And that's amazing.
Yeah. So no, and I always, it's always hard. You got all sorts of different windows up and you're trying to get everything, but thank you for the background and everything else. Let's go back to how it started and your story and how it came to be. Maybe we could start there, and we can, go into a conversation around some of the additional services that y'all provide, and then obviously we'll talk about the event.
Yeah, yeah. So, I am a mother of three sons. Two of my three sons struggled with substance use. One is doing fine now. The other one, I lost to an overdose in August of 2014. And I'm a structural engineer. That's the work that I was doing at that time, and I had been doing for 25 years. After I lost Jeff, I was working out of town, and so I was like far from home, like 5 hours from home, down in the Baltimore area. And, that isolation, right after I lost my son, the way that I dealt with my grief and isolation was I did a lot of research, about the overdose epidemic and became really kind of obsessed with what was going on and researched, heavily what was happening and just felt this desperate need to help compel change because I know based on my family's experience, we weren't doing enough nationally to address the issue. And back then, a lot of people forget because overdose is such a prevalent topic now. A lot of people forget that back then people were not talking about addiction or substance use or overdose. It certainly wasn't in news stories. It wasn't anything that people were having everyday conversations about like we are now. And so we were a big part of what compelled that change to make sure that the conversation got elevated.
The epidemic, the opioid epidemic, I was, as we talked about in our previous conversation when we first met, I was addicted to opioids on top of other drugs and alcohol, Vicodin being kind of the main vice. I started with Vicodin through an injury in the late 90s and then proceeded to abuse that, for close to 10 years. And then it came back in 2015. Fortunately, I had a cocaine issue that, for many years I was addicted to cocaine and I was able to get through that, and then alcohol and everything else. I never graduated to, higher opioids beyond Vicodin. I never graduated to Oxy. I never graduated, thank God, to heroin or things like that. It just was a massive problem for me. And, but, being a person that was addicted to those opioids, I can relate to the challenges that one faces when they are in a situation where they are so addicted to these substances and they can't have access to them anymore, and then they graduate to another level to find that same type of, I guess, high. When you're talking to parents and folks reach out to you, and a big part of your role is education and advocacy all the time, right? What are some things that you kind of talk about with these parents in terms of like what to look for and how to prepare? And because there's a lot of folks that look at this, tune into this, to the broadcast of this podcast, and chances are they probably have some family member or what have you that's addicted or in addiction actively. So what do you tell them? What are some of the things that maybe you wish you had been told back when maybe you had that opportunity? And again, whatever you feel comfortable talking about, totally up to you.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really great question, and I'm grateful to have that question because it's so important. Because so many people in a person's lives when their kids struggle with addiction, if they have coworkers or friends who have never gone through this, either themselves or with one of their own loved ones, a lot of people will give really bad advice, very unknowing, inexperienced advice. And
Give me an
so
example of that.
they'll say something like, I wouldn't put up with that. Just kick them out. And,
Mm.
if they don't stop using, they can't come home until they stop using. I would never put up with that from my kid, things like that, which
You
just,
can't do anything until they.
sure, sure. But there are lots of things that families can do.
Yeah.
And kicking someone to the curb and isolating them from their family and their loved ones and their support is literally the least helpful thing that could be done for someone who's struggling with any kind of addiction. We know that isolation, pain, trauma, lack of connection, emotional, challenges, mental health challenges, all of these things are things that lead to substance use. So why would we layer on something that causes isolation,
Sure.
trauma, pain, emotional instability,
But
you know,
also
by
codependency leads equally to usage as well. I mean,
say again.
codependency. So, parents that, continue to support the child and provide resources and money and things like that as well, I also know is a big challenge.
I I so code I have not seen that. I really have not. One, we've memorialized almost 4,000 lives to addiction. And when families submit those stories, we see the stories and we see the experiences, we collect data around that.
Mm.
I've talked to hundreds of families who have lost their loved ones, and I've talked to hundreds, if not thousands, of people in recovery. Like, this has been my work 24/7 for the past 11 years, supporting someone through housing, food, love, connection, and care does not lead to more use. Isolating someone and kicking them to the curb and practicing tough love always leads to negative consequences, always, and not typically for the betterment. People do not typically, what's the definition of addiction? Like, if you just Google search definition of addiction, is to continue doing something despite negative consequences. And so why would we think that, inflicting a negative consequence on someone, why would we think that that would cure addiction? The very definition of addiction is you continue doing it despite negative consequences.
Sure. That's a fair point. I think where I'm coming from is speaking from experience, and this is just my own experience. I'm not saying in generality. I know a number of folks that are in a program that have children that are in addiction that were living under their roof, and in a number of different examples, overdose on fentanyl and other drugs while under the roof of the house of the parent, and they were providing resources and counseling and, rehab and, you name it. Right. And they still proceeded to do that. And they were also providing food, shelter, and money and other resources. So what I mean by codependency, I mean like, providing resources to the situation, even when the parent means well. That's kind of where I'm coming from. And then this is just my personal experience.
Yeah, yeah. So the example you just gave is great. It's perfect. Like you said, I know several people who, I know them and they were living under their parents' roof and they continued to use and they even had overdoses in the house. Perfect, because the family probably saved them with Narcan and kept them alive. If they were living out on the street or in isolation or unhoused, that probably wouldn't have been the case. You might not know them today. Luckily, you know them because they're
Sure.
alive and their family kept them alive. That's amazing, and that's what
Mhm.
we're shooting for, is a world where families, what's the one thing that we know about mothers? We're supposed to love unconditionally. And it's only society's response to substance use that has told mothers that you're not supposed to love unconditionally if your kid starts using drugs, which is bizarre and weird to me.
Very.
If you look in the DSM-5, Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Diagnosing Substance Use Disorder and all mental health disorders, if you look in that, it's so fascinating to me that substance use disorder or addiction almost matches identically to eating disorders like bulimia and anorexia. So the mechanism in the brain, the way that it impacts your brain, the behaviors, the outcomes, all of those things match almost identically to a substance use disorder, which is fascinating, right? Would we kick our daughter out of the house for having anorexia and not stopping to throw up? Would we kick our kid out because they're bulimic? Like, no. So we should also not kick our kid out when they're struggling with substance use disorder. That doesn't mean we should be out there buying them their drugs, right? It doesn't mean we're giving them license to use or saying, I'm cool with this and it's just saying, I still love you despite this challenge that you're having. I hope that you come out of it. I need you to come out of it. I want you to come out of it,
Sure.
but I'm still going to love you regardless. And I'm going to do whatever I can do to keep you alive and do everything I can to put you on a path to wellness.
Yeah, and it's funny. I had a woman on a few episodes ago named Robin Fertel. She's a marriage family therapist in San Diego. And the topic of our conversation was on cross addiction. And basically, if you look at kind of the areas of the brain that are impacted, via addiction in terms of dopamine release and things like that, it happens whether you're taking a drug or you're starving yourself or you're overeating or you're racing a car super fast or you're gambling or you're, using pornography or you have a sex addiction issue. It's the same dopamine release regardless of what the addiction is. It doesn't matter whether it's a drug or alcohol or anything. And it's just interesting how it's such a, it's like you said, right? Like it wasn't much of a conversation back in 2014, and now it's becoming like a normalized everyday thing. That's part of the reason why, I started this. That was the main reason why I started this. I wanted it to become a conversation. I want this to become more of a normalized thing.
Yeah.
And it's not in this
Yeah.
day and age. It's shocking, right? So how do we help others? So, I mean, I agree with you. Like, being a parent and having a child, I mean, it's a lonely place to be. Super hard. It's like, how do you handle it?
Yeah. 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 It's really hard. And it's hard in this day and age when so many things set our kids up for this path. Cell phone use, getting
Social
them
media.
addicted to that dopamine rush at a very early age. It's like social media, cell phone use, instant gratification. It's, the list goes on and on. And then yet living in a time and age where there's a lot of hopelessness and despair, So it's, I think it's a tough time for kids to be alive and for parents to navigate through that. I would
I mean,
say,
it's funny. You walk out. Please go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please.
no, that's okay. I would just say, one of the things that I would encourage families, of young people these days, focusing on resiliency and tools to manage and regulate our emotions, and focusing on emotional intelligence is just so important, for young people, is to be able to navigate all of those things and reducing all of these potentially addictive tools that are inundating our young people's lives to whatever extent we possibly can, whether that's, sugar or social media. Just trying to
I
keep it low
agree.
as much as possible.
I totally agree. I also would say that transparency is a big deal when it comes to being a parent,
Yeah.
right? So like for me, my children, I have two. I have an almost 20-year-old and I have a 16-year-old that just started driving. Like I'm very, very open with them about my program. I'm very open with them about their DNA. I'm very open with them that, I'm not going to be with them, in life. And
Yeah.
you're going to be at a party and somebody's going to put out a white line or offer you a pill and give you a drink. And, you need to make that judgment call. It's like almost that, like you want to be, like Jiminy Cricket, right? From Disney, right? It's almost like you want to provide your kids with the proper tools, the Jiminy Crickets, if you will, those little clues that will allow them when they're faced, hopefully, with that situation down the road, they're able to think about, remember that time I actually had that conversation with my dad or my mom? Maybe I shouldn't do this. I think oftentimes, and again, this is just my opinion, I don't think it's, again, going back to the normalized conversation, I think a lot of parents just decide not to talk about it,
Yeah.
period. And I
Right.
think the sooner that we can just be open about this and say, this is a big problem, and the more that I think folks are out there, actually doing something about it and saying something about it, hopefully kids will be able to learn.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. I think all the time about, I'm suspecting we're about the same age, or you might be a little bit younger than me, but there have been so many changes in our society that are based on families trying to normalize conversations to reduce risks and harms. And so great examples are drinking while driving. There was
Mm-hmm.
actually an epidemic in the United States with young people dying from drunk driving incidents, whether it was their own driving or someone else's. And mothers responded and created a national movement. And what they did was they changed our conversation around that. And where we landed is where we are today, which is most parents will say to the young person, I don't want you to drink. You're not supposed to drink. I don't want you to drink. But if you do and you get inebriated, I want you to call me because I'd rather have you get home alive than drive drunk, right? That's like so normalized now. The other thing that's
Same with the conversation around texting and driving and using a phone while driving.
right. Yep.
Same thing.
Another great example. Yep. Safe sex. There was a teen pregnancy epidemic back in the 80s and 90s that was driving up teen pregnancies were out of this off the charts, and they decided to make condoms and birth control, access easier and make condoms available in schools. And I remember there was like outrage from families and parents throwing a fit, like, you're giving them a license to have sex, and people realize they're going to have sex anyways. And so families now say, you know you're a little young for this, but if you do have sex, I want you to practice safe sex. Most families will take that approach. We need to get to that point with drug use.
Yeah, and
I don't
especially in
want you to do
schools.
this.
Especially in schools, I don't feel like it's said enough or stated enough or there's enough programs there. I mean, like here in Oregon specifically, I'll just speak about Oregon. Like it's almost not at all.
Right. Oh, right. No, most schools across the country don't talk about it, or they don't have a standardized program or conversation. But we've got to get to the point where it's not just schools, it's an everyday practice, just like the
Yes.
drunk driving example, right? It's an everyday, this is a normal parental thing at this point. We want our kids, if they're going to have sex, to practice safe sex, even though we don't want them to have sex at all, right? At a young age. We don't want them to drink at a young age, but we
Yeah.
already say, if you drink, drive. We have to get to the same place with drugs. We
Yeah.
don't want you to use drugs. If you do, here are some things that are really important for you to know. We've got to be able to get the conversation all the way to the point where we're recognizing, even though we don't want our kids to use drugs, and they shouldn't, and we hope they don't, if they do, they need to know what's safe. Have Narcan on hand, test your substances, know where you're getting them from, and know the addiction risks of using these substances. We've got to be able to get to this highly normalized conversation.
Yeah, and there's organizations out there like, I don't know if you've heard of Vive 18, but that's an organization out of Arizona. The founder is a guy by the name of Jake. I've had him on the podcast. This is an organization that basically provides programs to schools to educate on drug, alcohol, and vaping use, and then they also provide programs once they actually speak at the school to set up, sobriety programs, like kids that just don't want to drink or use, to actually do that. They're trying to make that a conversation. Even
That's awesome.
they want to try and kind of recreate kind of the MAD movement, is what you were referring to earlier. But yeah, I totally agree with you. It needs to be more of a conversation, needs to be more normalized and acceptable and things like that. Let's this is fascinating. This is a really good conversation. I like where this is going. Let's kind of switch gears and talk a little bit about how the movement started in DC, what it's all about, when it is, how it works. I would love to hear about that. I'm sure the audience is gonna want to know more about that.
Awesome. So the Trail of Truth actually started in our hometown as an act of activism back in 2016. Sorry. After I had lost my son, as I mentioned, I started doing a lot of research about the overdose epidemic and really focusing and seeing what was going on. And I had this feeling that the overdose fatality numbers that I was hearing from our county officials were lower than reality. So I started asking families to report to me when they lost a loved one, or community members who knew of somebody. And by the middle of 2016, realized that it seemed like the county was reporting like half of the number of overdoses that I knew of, which was wild. So
Interesting.
yeah, so I contacted the county, thought that we'd have a conversation and they'd want to fix the problem, and then realized what they were doing really was masking the problem. They didn't want people to know the reality of how bad the issue was, because they thought it made us look bad as a community. What they didn't realize was this was happening all across the nation. It was back in the day, like I was saying, when people weren't talking so much about overdoses and overdose fatalities. So they wouldn't listen, they wouldn't change what they were doing. And I, as an activist,
God, that must have been so frustrating for you to hear that. especially had you were basically a year outside of
Yep.
losing your.
Yeah. Yeah, what I and others were saying was, if you're only counting half, who are you counting? Is my son counted? Because I want him counted. He died of an overdose and I want him counted. How do we know who's counted and who isn't? And it was so offensive to family members who, like ours, had struggled to find help often, because it felt like the county was denying these deaths. That way they wouldn't have to acknowledge their culpability and not having solutions. So it was very tied for us as families to the way that our loved ones were also neglected in trying to receive care at that time. There was so little care available at that time. So we were all infuriated. So I'm an activist, and things come to me. I always say it, I'm sure it sounds weird, but things come to me in visions. And so I had a vision of family members gathering with tombstones of their loved ones, and carrying those tombstones to our county office building, setting the tombstones against the building, and us all laying down on the sidewalk and tracing our bodies and writing the names of our loved ones in the tracings. And it was all, the vision was complete with music. There's like tribal drum music in the background. Um, and, the symbolism was, you can't erase our loved ones. They existed. Here they were, they existed. Here's beautiful things about them. Their lives mattered, and we want them counted. And so we did. We did that year. We planned the event very rapidly because, again, it wasn't really an event. It was an act of activism. But we did this in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. And it was the first time an overdose awareness event had been hosted in our community, but I think maybe in all of upstate New York. Like, there were no things like this at that time. There were no overdose awareness things at all. And about 350 community members showed up. It was wild.
Wow.
Like, I was so shocked. And so people showed up. People cared about the issue.
Did you have any politicians, congressmen, senators, anybody that heard about it that also participated early?
Yeah, we had a bunch of local elected officials come, a state representative, two state representatives actually came. Yeah, so it was a really big deal. And what it compelled was our district attorney to do an investigation, and he found out that at that time the county was claiming we had lost about 17 lives, and he discovered that we had lost 56.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it worked as an act of activism. It worked. It compelled the change that we were hoping to compel. It exposed
So
the truth.
so let me see if I understand this correctly. You started this event through a vision. You proceeded to do the event, and the goal of the event was to just to raise awareness on the topic. And through that, you were able to get, somebody that was in power to be able to actually go and look at the stats and actually come back and say, actually, those stats aren't correct. Let's do a reboot on this. And so that your goal? Or was that
Yeah,
just kind of like something, it was your goal? Okay,
that was
got it.
the goal. Yeah, the goal was to make them. My thought was, if these families submit their loved ones and we put their name and dates and pictures on a tombstone, and the family is saying, this is my loved one, they died, count them. The goal was to make the county count them.
So
And
in
so,
that particular initial group of 350, let's just say it was, let's say it was a group of 17. There was 56 that were there, and only 7 that were all saying my kid or my child or what have
right,
you
right.
passed away from a drug overdose, but the county was only reporting 17.
That's right. Yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah, and
crazy. That's
we had
crazy.
32. We had 32 from that year that we were aware of who had died. I knew of 32, which was double the county's number. And I kept saying, there's no way that I know of all of them. How could I possibly know of all of them? Of course I don't. And so sure enough, when the DA did his investigation, he found 56.
So
Goal of
today,
active activism was to compel that change.
gotcha.
What wasn't planned, which was more interesting and a learning for me, was I didn't realize how much families needed a place to put their grief.
Mm.
And that's how it became an event, was families so appreciated having their loved ones acknowledged, having them memorialized in a way that acknowledged that they were a beautiful, loved person. and that the community embraced them and wasn't going to stigmatize them in this space. Families needed it. And I didn't realize that, it gets me really choked up, but I didn't realize that so desperately until we hosted that act of activism.
I mean, and I would think there's just a lot of closure that can happen with these
Yeah.
families. That a lot of release.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's just, I say all the time, this thing has become so much more, there's so much of the positive aspects of it are so organic. They're so
Mm,
like natural and authentic, things that we never could have planned, that I didn't know, that I didn't anticipate. Kids come and huddle around their parents' tombstones and have their pictures taken.
oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's like things happen in the memorial cemetery. A mom comes every year and she sits and plays the guitar and sings, at our son's tombstone. Some others come and pray at the tombstone. Some others come and read from the Bible at their tombstone. And it's most of these families don't have a place to put their grief. A lot of these people died young. They don't have a gravestone. They don't have a grave site. And this is a place where families can view it as sacred and loving, and they can truly memorialize their loved one in this space. It's incredible.
I have all sorts of ideas that are coming into my brain around like
Good.
how you can use this event to be able to fundraise. One example, I'll just put this out there, is maybe you have an artist or two that shows up that's maybe taking pictures of these
Mm,
individuals by the gravestones, and then they can go and paint, or maybe over the photo, like a vision of the child or the parent that was lost, kind of looking over
mhm.
them, and then use that as a, maybe create pictures or postcards or shirts
Wow.
that you can use to fundraise around. I'm just thinking out loud here, but I mean, all sorts of cool things, so powerful, but equally, a great message,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, it's one of those things. We just hosted it in Washington D.C. this past September. We host it only every other year, only because we don't have enough resources. It's just financially for us, it's been a drain. We've had a hard time with the fundraising aspect of it. But we just hosted it in DC and we had 3,800 memorials, which is, impossible for people to envision. But if anybody is familiar with the Washington, DC National
I've
Mall,
seen pictures. It's
you know,
incredible.
long, narrow grass.
Just filled.
Yeah, and we covered 3 blocks of it,
Yeah.
3 blocks of the National Mall, which is just incredible, and so anyways, people walking through, it just stops them dead in their tracks. They're always like, "What
Yeah.
is this?" And then we explain it to them, and there's an immediate response of empathy. And so it's such an incredible tool to reduce stigma. There's something about standing next to a sacred memorial space with tombstones where all those nasty comments and ugly comments you see from people in society, they don't do it there. It strips them of that ability and they're just broken down to this is sad and we
Mm.
should care about it. It's just an incredible tool to change the way that people think about this.
Well, this has been great. Where do you see the organization going in the next couple of years? Like, are you going to continue doing what you're doing, or do you have bigger, larger, broader plans?
I have such big goals. And what I struggle with always is funding to execute those goals. So if there's any magical person who is listening, can either volunteer and help with that or can drop me $1 million, that would be amazing. This is we didn't talk about the movement building aspect of this, but this is now family based organizations all across the United States painting these tombstones, hosting their own Trail of Truth events in their communities and states, and then coming together in DC. What I would really love to expand this to is an empowerment program for those organizations to help them build capacity and grow and deliver services in their community, because it's so important that we support these families who want to make a difference. They're the ones who can. Like, they really
Mm.
can make a difference. We just need to empower them through resources. I also would really love to develop conference for families impacted by addiction, and that doesn't exist. There is no broad conference that helps these family-based organizations and families who've been impacted get educated and build community, and I think that we really could use that. I need resources to do that.
What do you think you would cover? What do you think you would talk about, or what would be kind of the big kind of agenda items for an event like that?
Yeah, so, like a lot of families don't even know what addiction treatment, all the pathways to recovery are. Right? A lot of families don't even know that there's a broad range of ways. You mentioned some when you open your podcast. There's a broad range of ways that people can enter recovery.
Absolutely.
Families don't know what those are. If it's a person who's never struggled with addiction, they don't know what those are. That, how to maintain a relationship with your loved one, even if they can't live in your house, because there's a lot of families who can't have that in their house. Maybe they have other young kids or whatever. How do you
Yeah.
maintain a relationship with your loved one despite the fact that they're struggling with addiction?
Mm.
What are the pathways in to addiction? What are the pathways out of addiction? So there's a ton of topics there, and self-care for families, because what a lot of parents do is they become very obsessed with their loved one's addiction and active use, and they don't take care of themselves. So their own mental health declines. I know so many parents with really bad coping mechanisms themselves. And so giving them, healthier coping strategies as their loved one is struggling with addiction.
Well, I was also unaware that this is at the kind of the local level, and so I'm glad that you actually brought this up as well. How would individuals be able to get in touch with you? Obviously there's the website, and I'll have information and links and stuff when this podcast goes live. But maybe you could give a couple of uh, you know, maybe spend a couple of minutes kind of talking through that so that everybody knows where to find you.
Awesome. Thank you. So if someone has a loved one that they've lost to any substance use related cause, they can submit their loved one on the trailoftruth.org website. So that's, trail of truth, all one word, .org. On that website, there's also a way to become a partner organization, and our contact information. If somebody wanted to host a tombstone painting event in their community, we hook you up we ship you tombstones, doesn't cost anything, and we ship you tombstones and teach you how to do that. Then you ship them back to us and they become a part of the National Memorial. TruthPharm has its own website as well. So it's like Tell the Truth and then pharm.org.
It's like pharmacy.
Yep. Yep. And all of our contact information is on there as well. We are a very low resourced organization. Our budget is I think we survived on $500,000 a year, both years, providing direct services and hosting a national event. So we're always looking for volunteer support to pull off what we pull off, is because we have a lot of people who care about the issue and volunteer their time. So we're always looking for volunteers, and we really do need funding to continue doing the important work that we're doing. So there's
Well,
many different ways people can get involved.
absolutely. Well, Alexis, it's been a pleasure having you here. I'm so grateful that we are now connected, and hopefully we will stay connected, and I can get more directly involved with this. Again, thank you for being here, and thank you for your courage and your bravery to start an organization like this, despite going through such a tragedy and such a painful experience as a parent. I can't even imagine what it would be like to lose, a child in the way that you did. So bless you for doing this, and I'm so grateful that we have connected. Just so that everybody knows, again, this organization. I try to have organizations on this podcast as much as possible. I try to have individuals that are really change agents, trailblazers to types of areas around addiction and mental health and things like that. And it just, this is why I really wanted to try and get you on, Alexis, to be able to tell your story and to be able to, have folks meet you and get connected to you in this particular way. So thank you so much for being here and spending time with
Thank
me.
you. Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Me too. Me too. We're going to go ahead and wrap up, everybody. Again, the Sober Cold Bear podcast. This is a resource to you. It's a podcast of great content with amazing individuals like Alexis and her organization, TruthPharm and Trail of Truth. the Trail Truth movement, if I can use that. Yes. But again, if you need to get sober, this is not a place to go. This is a place that you can go to listen to great people. There are things to do. You can go to rehab, you can go to AA, you can get a sponsor, you can work the steps. These are proven methods that work. And there's a lot of stories out there that can speak to that. So if you do need help, ask for help, ask a loved one, ask me, reach out to Alexis, TruthPharm, your best friend, your coworker, but it's okay to not be okay. And we're going to go ahead and sign off. And thank you again for being here, Alexis. And again, so grateful. And we will talk soon.
Same. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Sometimes I feel like I want to fly without no wings. I elevate inside my mind. And sometimes I look inside